What's up guys, welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Riddell, and in today's video we have our first episode in our first season of the subscriber game analysis installment. I'm super pumped about this. Basically, any of you guys can copy and paste a game of yours in the comment section below, or just drop a link and it will have a chance to get analyzed on this channel. Our first game comes from none other than Nick C, whose Lichess username is unmoved_mover. Feel free to follow him and play some games. Feel free to hit me up at the Chess Giant YouTube on Lichess as well. I'd love to talk and play a few games. I'm super excited to show you all this game by Nick. Many think that the London system is a boring opening which only leads to slow positional chess. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's the #1 opening for attacking and aggressive chess players, but it has a lot more potential than people think, and Nick shows this in his game as he starts off with the move d4, and against d5, plays bishop f4, reaching the accelerated London system. Against knight f6, we now see the move e3, followed by knight f3. This is all very typical for the London. Play d4, get that dark squared bishop out, continue with e3, and just play natural developmental chess with knight f3, soon looking to play moves like bishop d3 and castling kingside. Now here in this position, black played the move bishop d6, offering up a trade. And here we see Nick play knight e5, which is a very strong move, but I do want to mention that in a position like this, especially for you London players, knight d2 is a very interesting option. Some of you may be wondering, wait a second, why can't black just take our bishop on f4? I mean, it seems as if our pawns are doubled, and they are, but in this case, I actually think that it is a strength for white. I mean, following the move castling kingside, we can play bishop d3, and I mean, look at the control of the dark squares that we currently have, attacking c5, e5 with both pawns, as well as g5. e5 is going to be a gray square for our knight on e5. Our bishop on d3 is really controlling the light squares, attacking all the way down to h7, and white has a very playable game. Some may think that this pawn on f4 is a weakness, but if black ever does play a move like queen d6 trying to attack it, we can simply play g3, continuing to hold our pawn structure together. And if a move like c5, which by the way is really black's only counterplay here, black really can't get in the move e5 because there's so many other pieces attacking it. So here after the move c5, we can take that pawn off the board, play a move like c3, and we're just playing chess. So guys, I just wanted to mention that knight d2 option. It's a very interesting choice, and many of your opponents may take the bishop on f4, thinking you just made a mistake and making you double your pawns. However, as we just mentioned, we get full control of the dark squares with a very comfortable middle game position. But here, Nick played the move knight e5, which by the way is also a very strong move. Talk about an active knight here, attacking c6, d7, f7, and g6, really putting the pressure on black here. Black could take the knight on e5, but I don't think this is the best option, giving away one of their bishops at move 5 in the game. We instead see knight bd7, black trying to gain some pressure, trying to build some momentum against that pawn on e5, but here in this position, Nick really doesn't care. He just plays the move bishop d3. He realizes that black really can't take this knight. I mean, if knight d7 takes e5 is played, we're simply going to take back with our d-pawn, attacking both the bishop and the knight. And if bishop takes e5 is played, we're now going to play d takes e5. Notice here how this knight can't come to h5 or g4 because of our queen pouncing down on both of those squares, and a move like knight g8 is probably black's best option because knight e4 runs into us taking that knight, followed by knight c3, attacking that pawn. And if black tries to hold on to that pawn with knight c5, we're not going to take the queen on d8. We're instead going to play queen g4, attacking that pawn on g7. And after a move like king f8, play rook d1. I mean, just coming down, attacking that queen on d8. We as white have a very nice game here with a huge attacking advantage. So guys, here in this position, black realized that they couldn't take the knight on e5. I think black's best option is probably something like knight f8, trying to bring that knight to g6, attacking both the knight on e5, but more importantly, the bishop on f4. I mean, in this position, this knight really is untouchable. So we see black play the move c5. And I understand why black would play this, but it opens up a very nice tactic that Nick played. Pause the video if you'd like and try to see the move that Nick played in this position. Well, guys, assuming that you pause the video, the move here for white is knight takes f7. Absolutely killer move, attacking both the queen on d8, the rook on h8, as well as the bishop on d6. And because of that, black really does need to take the knight on f7. Notice how queen a5 check doesn't work because of b4, attacking the queen. Now, if black wants to take with c takes b4, that's completely okay. We're simply going to take that bishop with check against the king. And after queen takes b4, we're simply going to play c3, and we're going to capture that bishop on d6. Anyways, this position is resignable for black. So after this beautiful knight takes f7 move, we then see king takes f7 and bishop takes d6. Here white is simply up a pawn. Here Nick realized that by playing c5, the bishop on d6 was open. So we see knight takes f7, and we're simply up a pawn. Black continues with taking that pawn on d4, and after e takes d4, the move knight b6. Now here in this position, our bishop is currently being attacked, so let's get that bishop out of the way. And now we see black continue with rook f8, and following castling kingside, black play king g8. Notice here how after king takes f7, we see black playing rook f8 and king g8. Very resourceful chess from black, trying to get a somewhat normal looking position with a safe king. But now we just see white continue with knight d2. White has nothing to worry about here. We're simply up a pawn, and we're going to continue to play natural developmental chess. We see black play the move bishop d7. And guys, I really do think on top of the pawn, white simply has much more active pieces. I mean, just look at our bishop pair. Our bishop on d3, attacking all the way to a6, and especially all the way down to that pawn on h7. This bishop on g3 is attacking all the way down to that b8 square, as h4 ideas are always in the air, pinning that knight on f6 to the queen on d8. We also have knight b3 and knight c5 ideas, as well as knight f3 and knight e5 ideas. But now in this position, if we look at the black pieces, this knight on f6 is solid, as well as the rook on f8, but really the rest of black's pieces aren't really doing much, especially this bishop on d7, which is really a tall pawn, just defending this backwards pawn on e6. And this knight on b6 really doesn't have a ton of activity. It can barely even move. It could come to somewhere like a4 or c4, but now we see white play the move b3. I really don't think that knight a4 or knight c4 was really a huge threat in this position, but I do like the move b3, trying to limit any kind of counterplay going forward in the game. This kind of reminds me of Anatoly Karpov, just stopping your opponent's pieces from being able to move and then continuing with your attacking plan. We see black play rook c8, and now as white, we're playing the move rook e1. Really, guys, my recommendation with rooks is to put them on open files. In this position just a move ago, this rook on f1 really wasn't doing much, but now on e1, it is pouncing down on that pawn on e6, making this bishop a prisoner. So we see the move rook e8, bringing in some reinforcement, and now we see white continue with the move bishop f1, a very strong move. However, I do want to mention, in the game of chess, if you ever see your opponent's knights on b6 or g6, always be aware of potential h4 or a4 ideas. I mean, in this position, if we played the move a4, we're actually threatening to play a5, forcing this knight all the way back to a8. I mean, talk about a bad knight. So I think here black would probably have to play a move like bishop c6, in which case we have a ton of different options. We could play a move like c3, just solidifying our pawn structure. We could play a move like bishop h4, pinning that knight to the queen on d8, or even a move like rook e3, eventually looking to bring it to g3 or h3. We have a ton of ideas here with a very flexible game, as black really doesn't have a ton of counterplay, if any at all. So guys, Nick didn't play the move a4 as I mentioned, and by the way, this isn't a mistake on Nick's part. I'm just throwing that out there for your future games. b6 and g6 are very awkward squares for the knights, so it never hurts to play a move like a4, threatening to push it back. But we see the move bishop f1, and the very next move, the strong c4 push. I mean, just breaking through on the queen side of the board, and now black has a big decision to make. Are they going to take the pawn on c4, or are they not going to take the pawn on c4? In this position, black wisely captured that pawn on the c-file. However, what happens if black didn't take that pawn and instead just played a move like a6? Well, now we as white have a decision to make, and c takes d5 would actually be a huge mistake because one of the minor pieces could take back on that square, and they're going to have a very solid middle game position with very active pieces. Instead, we have to limit the activity of our opponent's pieces and play c5, kicking this knight back to d7. And I mean, just notice the control that we have, especially on the dark squares in this position. It's very hard for black to even move, and now we can reinforce our control of the dark squares with b4. And notice in this position, black can't really ever play a move like b6, trying to put some pressure on c5, because our bishop on f1 comes out of nowhere, taking on a6, attacking the rook, and we're simply winning this game. So guys, black realized that we're trying to play c5 followed by b4, and we're simply crushing the queenside in space in that middle game position. So we see the move d takes c4, also slightly activating this bishop on c6, and against this we now see knight takes c4, eyeing the potential knight d6 move. Notice how if knight d6 is played, we're actually forking both the rook on c8 and the rook on e8. So here black takes that knight on c4, and after b takes c4, we see the move knight e4, centralizing the knight and attacking our bishop on g3. Now here in this position, Nick didn't want to lose the bishop and instead played bishop e5. I mean, talk about a strong bishop. It really can't be touched. It can never be touched by this bishop on c6, and it's going to be very hard for this knight to attack that bishop on e5. So this is a very strong move. Notice how this is considered a hole in chess. A hole in chess is a square where your opponent's pawns can never attack that piece for the rest of the game. A square like e5 is a very strong option in this position for one of your minor pieces, as none of the opponent's pawns can ever attack it, and it's very difficult for their minor pieces to try to trade. We see the move queen g5 here from black, trying to create some counterplay, and now the move rook e3. I absolutely love this move from Nick. Basically what white is saying is, look, if you ever move this knight, we're simply going to play rook g3, attacking our queen, and potentially even take that pawn on g7. We see black play rook f8, and at least for a second, it may seem as if black is crawling back into this game. I mean, both the knight and the rook are attacking that f2 pawn, and both the bishop on c6 and the queen on g5 eye that pawn on g2. But white has played very well this game, and there's nothing to worry about following the move f4, attacking the queen, and following queen h4, we see queen e2. Now, many of you are probably aware that in chess, a rook is generally considered to be worth about 5 points, and a bishop and knight are considered to be worth 3 points each. Now, keep in mind, guys, in chess, if you have to give up your queen to get the checkmate, do it. If you have to give up a rook, a knight, and a bishop to get a checkmate and win the game, do it. The end result is to checkmate the opponent's king, but we assign point values to pieces because, generally speaking, they have different amounts of firepower and value to us. So in this position, we would love to take that knight on e4, giving up 5 points and getting 2 3-point pieces, so therefore 6 points in return. Here, black doesn't want to lose more material, so we see the move knight f6. And now rook h3. I mean, just swinging this rook through, attacking that queen on h4, and following the move queen g4. The move queen d3, white keeping the tension in this position. After bishop e4, attacking the queen, we now see queen b3. Now in this position, I think black's best move is probably something like queen f5, and I personally like the move rook f7. I mean, just trying to hold this game together. But we now see the move g6. Black probably played the move g6 because they wanted to play knight h5, attacking that pawn on f4. But it turns out that g6 simply weakens the positioning of these dark squares, and we now play the move rook e1, threatening to take that knight and then capture that bishop on e4. So we see the move queen f5, and yet again, let's put the pressure on black. Play queen e3, again threatening to take that knight and win a piece. So we see this bishop run away, and now the move bishop d3, attacking the queen. Now, when I first saw this position, I wondered, wait a second, why did black play the move knight g4? Why didn't black play the move queen g4, threatening a mate in one? Well, it turns out that here in this position, white could simply play queen f2, stopping the mating threat, and really no matter what black does next, we're going to play rook h4, trapping the queen. I mean, even after a move like knight h5, we have rook h4, and notice how this queen can't really move. So the best option is probably just a bailout with queen takes g2 check, but in this case, they're simply giving up a piece. We have a very strong endgame position, up a ton of material, and this game is simply winning for white. So going back to this position, black did not opt for the queen g4 option because of queen f2 and rook h4 trapping that queen, and instead we see the move knight g4. And there's a ton of different options here for white that win the game, but I like what Nick did here with the move queen g3. Notice how we're attacking both the queen and the knight, and the queen is defending the knight, but in this position the queen can't really hold on. They can't play queen g5 because of the pawn, and they can't play queen h5 because of the rook. So we see queen f7, and we simply win that knight on g4. Here black plays rook ce8, and guys, in this position we're up a ton of material and we have a ton of activity. I mean, talk about our bishop on e3, bishop on d3, taking control of the dark squares and putting some pressure on that pawn on g6. We have an active queen on g4, attacking both g6 and e6, and a very strong rook on h3, pouncing all the way down to that h7 pawn near the king. Now in this position, all of our pieces are active except for one, and that is this rook on e1. In chess, guys, always be asking yourself, how can I slightly improve my position? What piece do I have that may not even be a bad piece, but that can be slightly improved? And in this position, that is this rook on e1. We see the beautiful maneuver of rook e3 followed by rook g3. I mean, just bringing this rook into the action, forming a battery ram, putting even more pressure on g6 with our queen, rook, and bishop on d3. And here in this position, guys, black can't really do much. They can barely even move. Queen f5 is not an option. The only move I see that could potentially be some kind of counterplay is h5, attacking our queen. But in this position, we simply take the pawn. And notice how black can't take the rook because it's pinned to that king on g8. Rook h8 coming soon, and we're simply winning. So black really doesn't have a ton of options here, and we see the move rook d7. I mean, notice how black is kind of just moving back and forth. There's not a ton that they can do, and we see Nick, in Anatoly Karpov type fashion, continue to slowly improve the positioning of his pieces with queen h4, preparing this bishop takes g6 idea. Here attacking the queen on f7, we see h takes g6, and here Nick finishes off the game with queen h8 checkmate. Game over. If you'd like to see my top 5 tips for tournament chess players, click the video to the left. If you'd like to learn my top 5 tips for beginner chess players, click the video to the right. Make sure to subscribe, copy and paste a game down below, and I'll see you next time. Appreciate y'all.